coming on this rainy day outside. It's a wonderful crowd today. We're here for the SALOME Roundtable orientation. We have assembled a wonderful panel here of all of our principal leads and the director and the conductor. So I'm going to start by just asking from Sean at the end here to introduce yourself and tell us your character, and we'll just go down to the row.
Okay, my name is Sean Panikar, and I'm singing Narvok, the captain of the guard.
Oh, my name's Katrine Hilbe, and I'm not singing anything. I'm directing. I'm moving the singers around.
My name's Ryan McKinney. I'm singing Johanna.
Or John the Baptist.
John the Baptist.
Hi, I'm Malada Kodali, and I'm doing Salome.
I'm John McMaster. I sing Herod, and the opera's all about me.
I'm Gwendolyn Jones. I sing Herodias,
It's
the
all about
mother, yes, of course, mother of Salome, the wife of him, and yes, it is about me.
I'm Robert Lyon.
And it's always about
It's
you.
about. It's all about him.
I started to say to John, there are lots of famous examples where composers named an opera after one character and then changed it to another. For example, Aida was originally on Nereus, and this is not the case. It's always been Salome.
That may change.
But definitely, Orchestral can be played without singers, and probably the score will still sound interesting enough.
Well, I agree. Probably one of the most famous parts of the opera would be the dance, which is excerpted a lot. Just in case anybody does not know the story of Salome, I've asked Katrina to give a little overview of what the plot is so we can all be on the same page.
Okay, as already people have mentioned, it's all about every one of them. It's actually a story about a group of people who have only their own passions in mind. So Salome is, as the central character, she is hotly pursued by her stepfather, Herod. So Herod wants Salome. Salome is also wanted by the captain of the guard, Nalamoth, who also is in love with her. Salome doesn't want either of them. She hears the prophet Johannan's voice, who's kept as a prisoner of the tetrarch Herod in a cistern, in an abandoned well, in a faraway place in his palace. And the setting is a banquet that he holds in honor of his own birthday with guests, Cappadocian and Jews and Nazarenes, and probably a lot more people who we never see. And so she escapes his praying eyes and hears Johannan's voice and asks to have him brought out, which is not a good idea and is forbidden. But she forces her way. She's quite willful, and she's the princess, after all. So she sees him and she falls in love with him, or at least explodes in a equally tunnel-visioned passion for him. And he rejects her in turn. So it's also about a story of people wanting someone who clearly does not want them back. And he does his best to keep his eye on his God. She is so floored by his rejection that when Herod asks her to dance for him, and he will give her anything she likes, she finds a way to exact revenge and does dance for him, does give him what he wants, and then she asks for Johannan's head on a platter. And she gets it, and she does finally get the kiss. But she also experiences that revenge is an empty experience, is an empty thing, and she doesn't feel as satisfied and happy at the end as she thought she would. So it's also an experience that in the end, you will have to deal with the rejection. He will never say yes to her. And it's also about Herodias, her mother, who has a daughter who she thought would be her clone, and then suddenly she finds out that her daughter actually becomes a competition in the favors of her husband, and so it's also a mother-daughter story going on. So it's Salome has many different stories in there, and every character has his and her own arc and own tragedy to find and trajectory. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
I want to start with talking about with John and Gwen as Herod and Herodias. I mean, you're the parent, stepfather and mother of Salome. Tell us a little bit about how complicated your relationship is.
Thank you for letting me.
I'm always polite, Gwen, you know that.
Yes, you are. You are. Women had no rights at this time. In these times, your only power was through the man you married, and you could be discarded on a whim, and he is full of whims. My previous husband, we were talking about this in the car, whether he murdered him. He insists we conspired together to murder him. But in any case, Salome's dad is dead, which led me to be free to marry him, and that's fine and good. But I can say that as a woman, and she prides herself on being a great beauty, but she's aging, and there's no way you can compete with a fresh, nubile 15, 16-year-old. Interested or not, you just can't compete. She's slathering on the makeup, she's wearing the jewels, she's wearing the bright colors, she's putting herself in front of him as much as possible because that's her only hope. She's trying to survive. And this little minx is stealing things out of her closet.
It wasn't my fault.
Stealing things out of her closet, doing as I wish but not. That's what all teenagers do. And starting to be a real object of worry, particularly when Herod, who has all power in the world, casts that lustful eye and will not be distracted. She can be the queen can be discarded quickly. Now, another thing that's worrying her is that John the Baptist, who is down in the cistern, one of his little songs he keeps singing about is the whore of Babylon, and that would be me. And she doesn't particularly like hearing that hit tune. True or not, he talks about her sins, the death of her husband, all the other men in her life, and she just as soon not have it trumpeted by this dirty cave dweller. So she's suspicious, she's deeply frightened about her future, she's egotistical and prideful, she's admiring in a way of this creation, Salome, that walks on the earth because of her, and at the same time, this child is becoming a monster. And if that monster was going to work for her, that might be okay, but that has not been demonstrated. Thank you.
As Tetrarch, Herod enjoys unbridled power in the area. While ostensibly governed from Rome, he is the king or ruler, if you will, for Judea. And so he knows no limits to his power, and certainly no limits within his palace. And that's why he can enjoy playing these two off against each other. And it's kind of like a bad situation comedy or soap opera where these two are going at each other constantly. And the repartee that Oscar Wilde gives us in this play is really worthwhile. And so if you have a chance to really pay attention to the surtitles or to read the libretto beforehand, the kind of things that they say to each other. You know, she says to me, your father was a camel driver, okay? And a thief and a robber, and you know. And then he turns and says, oh, Salome, why don't you come sit on the throne? You know, that your mother...
Throne meaning his lap.
Well, that's the way, in this case, but that's a wonderful image, too, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, I think it's a microcosm for us of a dysfunctional family, but of also what happens when power has no limits. And when people have no insight.
Very well. In combination, go back to Katrin here. How, I mean, such strong written text. I mean, the text is amazing with the show, and such severe angles I could put with characters on this. How do you work together to keep them from becoming caricatures and letting the text work for itself?
Well, you can't let the text work for itself. You still have to, you work through the characters. I mean, what is so great about it is that the quality of the text is so powerful. So I mean, it's so, and the characters also so complex. And it's a choice. I mean, we choose not to make them caricatures. There are productions where Herod and Herodias are clearly caricatures.
Absolutely.
And it's a choice. The text allows for both. I find it more interesting when you... I always find it that craziness is a cop-out, because it allows the audience to distance themselves from that person, to say, oh, that person is just crazy, or that's just perverse. So it has nothing to do with me. But Herod's desires for Salome, we find a lot of that in our society, and in any given society. And the way Herod and Herodias go at each other is not that far removed from general bad marital bickering. And I find it much more interesting to then explore the complexities within, and also then in discussions, also in talks that we have about the characters with John and then with Gwen, where are these people coming from? What is their emotional underpinning? What are their desires? What are their intentions? What are their motivations? What is their own emotional world? Because as performers, or as to create a full character, it's important that you have a possibility to connect as a performer to what drives this character. That doesn't mean you have to condone what this character does, but they all come from somewhere. And emotionally, that emotional nexus, what drives Herod there, or the fact that he is driven by this obsession. I mean, we do know that we cannot choose what we desire. We really can't. We can choose what we do with that desire, and obviously Herod makes very different choices than other people would. But he is also, in a way, a captive of that passion he has. As every character is, they're all captives of that overriding desire and passion that they have. But it depends on who they are as people, as characters, what choices they then make. Like Salome chooses to have Yohanan killed because he doesn't want her. Narabot chooses to take his own life because his desire and his yearning and his passion has been rejected. That makes them very different people. But they don't have control. And if you realize that, it's a stupid thing to say, oh, to connect to the humanity of a character. But in the end, it has something to do with that. And then I find actually then Herod is much more chilling because he's then closer. More monstrous and more dangerous, because he's not just a buffoon.
So creepier.
Yeah, creepier.
Well, just a little thought as we talked about trying to unravel the text. And of course, the wonderful thing about opera is that it's not text without music.
Right.
It's music as well. And Strauss is a real chameleon in terms of what he lays underneath it, because there are multiple layers. And while and so it's harder to say explicitly, in this moment this music is sweet or bitter or whatever. But that is also part of our choice. When we're saying, what does a line mean? Or what line reading do I want for this? Or what am I saying to my wife in this moment? Is what colors are underneath my words in the music. And that helps us discern, on the one hand, what Strauss might have been laying out for us, and it's also something we can play against if we choose to not make that choice.
Absolutely.
That's another possibility.
Well, there's a very natural progression then to Robert then about those colors and about the complexity, because this is a very complex score.
Enormously so. I think most of you who have familiarity with the symphonic repertoire appreciate Strauss for his famous tone poems. The term itself is very revealing. What is a tone poem? And that is the simplest concept would be program music, music that tells a story, music that represents something. We don't necessarily find that to be the case in the world, the Germanic world of the symphony, except isolated examples like the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. But if you consider that this unique language that Strauss developed is an immediate extension of Wagner. Wagner died in, 1881, and this piece premiered in 1905. So, a quarter of a century later, with all of those influences of what the language of music drama was. Wagner made a great distinction between what was opera and what was music drama. Opera had its conventions of arias, of duets, of trios, of numbers, pieces that could stand alone, a separate chorus that could be interjected or even extracted in some instances, into this continuous web of orchestral sound that was borne along by leitmotifs. A leitmotif is a musical moment. Bum, 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 bum. That is the moment, the very moment that Salome conceives the idea that the revenge would be something that she could command, could control, could possess. It's, I want the head of Johanna. Now, you take that little musical signature and how it's used throughout the big orchestral tone poem of John the Baptist marching back to the cistern, and then the famous dance of the seven veils, and then the exchanges between her and Herod. And you see how he has knit the fabric of this music with all of these musical descriptions that are tied to events, tied to objects, in the Wagnerian system of leitmotifs. And this entire opera is put together that way. He wrote, or commented, and writers captured, his own statements about what he hoped to do musically. He said, I want to write music that is as iridescent as oriental silk. And so think of the way that a fabric like that captures light and reflects it. And so when he's talking about the emotional makeup of these characters, this is the kind of musical language that he uses. He also said a fun statement, I would love to be able to write music that's graphic enough to portray the spoon in the cup. Well, that's obviously impossible to do, but at least you see what he's striving for in terms of clarity of establishing a musical idea with a theatrical idea or an objective idea. So Strauss is famous for writing this program music, and as I jokingly say, Salome is a 100-minute tone poem with singers as the obbligato, because you are getting this constant barrage of information coming from the orchestra with all of the themes that are associated with events and characters and things like that as the superstructure. Now, I won't take everyone's time to go into more detail about that because you could talk about Strauss's musical language for a long period of time. But it is that symphonic foundation that differentiates this particular piece and Electra, a counterpart from the same period, from other Strauss operas by matters of degree, putting it much closer to the Wagnerian leitmotivic system than, let's say, late Verdi, which was also being written at this time, and as he had pushed through those boundaries of you don't have a recognizable aria, you don't have a recognizable duet, except in very, very isolated moments. He too was striving for that organic unity that is music drama instead of opera, with its history of set pieces. And he has fully achieved it with Salome.
I want to start with, actually I want to talk to Mlada now about the, your role you're the title character. The opera, a lot of it rides on you. We just discussed, Gwen said earlier, that Salome is 16 years old. How
If not even younger.
if not even younger, how difficult is it to play 16 years old? Although I'm sure you're only 18, I know that now. But how difficult is it to do that, and how difficult is it to make it realistic, considering the incredibly difficult singing you have to do? I mean, this role is an insanely difficult role. So talk a little bit about how you balance that. How do you keep it simple, but it's so complicated?
Simple and complicated. You know, the thing is that I never even thought about it. You know, I just do. If anybody will ask me, how do you do it? They'll say, well, okay, I don't know. I just go there and I do. And the sky is giving me extra forces and strength to refill when I feel myself really literally squeezed and exhausted. And I just don't know. My enthusiasm is probably refills that all again and again and again. Of course, I would never dare to compare myself to, you know, but when some student of Mozart asked him, please, maestro, can you teach me now? We will already studied enough through the sonatinas. May I start with symphonies? Mozart tells me, oh, look, maybe just something in between, something simpler. You're still young enough for symphonies. He said, okay, but you, maestro, created your first symphony being just about 4 or 5 years old. Mozart said, true, but I never asked anybody how to do that. I mean, complicated or simple, you know, if you take any actor or artist or musician, they just do it. I don't think we're really pricing and counting, calculating how much we give. And I hope every colleague of mine, everybody will agree that you just do it because the God is giving you all this.
Okay. Would you talk, you and Ryan, talk a little bit about your relationship? I mean, this is
On which the whole thing hangs.
exactly, that is exactly it.
It's well,
Both married and with children.
yeah. Well, something Katrina and I and all of us have talked about a lot is that there are definitely two distinct paths to take with John the Baptist in this show. He can be done as very straightforward. He's a holy man. He's a prophet. And that's his only role in this, and it's mostly about how Salome feels about her, about him, and he doesn't really have any reaction back to her, other than to scream out prophecies at her. That's sort of one way to do it. And the other way, which is the way we've chosen, is that he is a holy man. He feels devout in his belief, but he's also a man. He's a young man who sees this woman, and he's never seen anyone like her, and she's talking about him, and she wants to touch him, and part of him is tempted by that. Not necessarily consciously, but his body is tempted by this idea. And I think talking about in the music and how it helps us decide what choices to make. There's so many moments in our scene together where I feel Johannan's music pulling him towards her. And then you have this really strong break musically when he goes back into another rant, and where he's pulling himself back and not wanting to let him he doesn't want to give himself over to her because that would be giving in. In his mind, that's evil, that's bad, that's, everything I believe in that goes against, and I can't go there, I can't let myself go there. And so we have this kind of back and forth in this production, which you'll see that we have all these moments of almost coming together, and and then breaking away in one way or another, which really it fits with the music really well. And he doesn't just yell at her and say, "Get away from me." He does do that a lot, but he tries to, in his way, I think in his mind, he tries to help her. He tries to teach her what he thinks he knows. And I think that it's a really complicated. It's a complicated relationship. It's complicated feelings. Just like anytime, if you were in a situation where there was a person that you had these kind of physical feelings for, that who was wanting you, and you knew that wasn't the right thing to do. I think that's on a base level that's what he's going through.
Mm-hmm.
You have more to add to that, Katrina?
No, that's pretty much covered it. Yeah. And that is also, one reason why, for me, what that I think is really, it's told in the music, it's in the words, but I also feel that it's in a very pragmatic level, it's theatrically much more interesting and dramatically much more interesting if you have complex characters on it that are conflicted, that struggle with their decisions, that struggle against emotions, as if you have one person who's just a pillar and the other one wants something. It's theatrically a lot less satisfying. Mm-hmm. And I personally also feel emotionally much less moving. And the music and the text allow for that story to be told, and thereby then also giving the viewers and the hearers and listeners a much more involved emotional experience. And also, I think it's then much sadder to see how close. She says at the end, "If you had seen me, you would have loved me." And in a deep sense, I think this is true. Yes, he has looked at her, but he has never actually seen her without being blinded or blindfolded by who he perceives she is. He only sees her as Salome, Herodias' daughter, as the daughter of the whore of Babylon. He never saw the girl. Mm-hmm. As she also, might I add, never sees an emaciated, struggling, half-famished creature who actually rather right now needs a bowl of soup more than being pursued with hot passion. Empathy doesn't come to any of these characters. So you have this incredible train wreck of two completely misguided or unseeing people who are so involved in their own feelings. And I feel that is really the tragedy. Neither of them really sees and perceives the other, where they're at. Mm-hmm. And had they met under different circumstances, they might have fallen in love. Who knows? I do really believe that there is like a love story manqué there. And I think it is supported in the music. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, one other relationship we want to talk about, it would be Salome and Narabot. And how Narabot really is the most important character in the opera. And so tell us, both of you, kind of talk about, the first words we hear about beautiful Salome. Talk to us about that.
Right, so Narabot is the captain of the guard. He was a prince, a Syrian prince, who was captured by Herod. And so because of his nobility, instead of just throwing him into the dungeon or whatever, he was elevated into this position of captain of the guard. So he's an outsider with a relatively high rank amongst other soldiers who've been toiling probably their whole lives without attaining my status. And so, as a prince, I don't see anything wrong with being in love with the Princess Salome. And so, in my mind, it's completely normal, and of all the potential relationships in the opera, that would seem to be the most normal. He's the one that actually loves...
That's a low bar.
I'll take what I can get. So his love is pure, it's normal, he sings about how beautiful she is. But at the same time, especially in the way we're playing it in this show, she doesn't really even acknowledge him until she needs something from me. And now Salome, at Herod's birthday party, is starting to come into her own. She's realizing that, her body and just her presence among males wields a certain power. And with Yohanan, she has to really, she's throwing everything at him and not getting him to bite at all. Herod, she just takes off her top, and Herod's like, all right, I'm good. But for Narboth, she just makes eye contact with me, and I'm like, I'll do whatever you want. And then she says, let Yohanan out, I want to speak to him, and I do it. Because I'm more innocent, I guess. You know, just that simple eye contact in the relationship, and then she's acknowledging my presence is enough for me to do whatever she wants. The outcome doesn't work out for me. I get really excited when Yohanan, you know, turns her away and rejects her advances, but she never comes back to me. She still keeps, and that's, I mean, the whole opera, she's always after Yohanan, even to the end when she gets his head cut off. And rather than, she reacts violently and has his head cut off, I react violently and kill myself. So, you know, then I'm done.
I want to put this out to everybody on the table, but kind of led with Robert and Katrin about this is for anybody. When you put a production together, you don't come in with a list of this is the way it will be done. It's a working in progress. It's a relationship building and thinking through stuff. Talk about putting this specific one together, where you have particularly people who've done these roles many times, who have very firm beliefs, and with other singers who have possibly even opposite beliefs. I don't know. Talk about it if you can about that.
If I may start?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've done this role a few times, and the first time I did it, Katrin put me into a show in Frankfurt that already existed, and so I was learning the moves that had been created for other people, and she was helping me with that, and she had been the assistant on that production for another director, so neither one of us had much flexibility in terms of being able to change things. We had to do what others had shaped. So this is a very different kind of situation, but I'm hired to bring my game, right? I'm hired because people know that this is a role that I sing and have played with some success, and so I bring that game. But to come and to be intransigent and to say, this is what I do, I'm not interested, Katrin, in what your thought is, or I'm not interested, Gwen, in how you see playing with me, is really not helpful, first of all, and unprofessional. But also, to get at something that's maybe a little bit deeper, I'm fond of saying to young singers when I'm working with them or in master classes or whatever, if you're not a collaborator, then don't do this job. This is a job about working together in groups. And if you want to control it all, then be a recitalist. You know, you can work with a pianist that you hire. They don't even really have to be an equal, though the best relationships are of equals. You can hire them, and we all can tell stories about people we know that have done that, and they just tell them what to do, and they choose the program, and they control all the variables. But that's pretty boring as a life. And one of the wonderful things about what we do is that, you know, if this was really intolerable, and it's not, it's a wonderful situation. But if it was really intolerable, in a month, I'm somewhere else. So it's not like somebody that's working for the post office for 40 years and feels the need to bring the gun into the office because, you know, I've just had it. You know? So that said, you know, there's a reason why they call what we're doing playing a role, right? We do get to play these things out. And when people have a certain amount of sophistication, and I think this is a very good group in that regard, people come in and say, well, here's my idea, and when someone says, well, I'm not so sure, we try it. We try it. And then everyone can feed in on that. You know, and Katrin can say, okay, that was a good idea, John, but it didn't really read. I mean, that maybe is what you're thinking, but I'm not seeing it. Try this, and then I try that. And then Robert might well say, well, you know, that didn't work, or it did. So it's something we build together.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting for me being with this whole group of people. Everyone has done their roles multiple times, and this is my first Yohanan. But talking about collaborating and everything, it's a really interesting position to be in. and great position to be in, to be doing this with people that know it so well. It's it's a really, Johanna's a very difficult role for a young singer to take on, and to be able to do it in this situation where everyone around me has seen several versions of this and is helpful in playing off of and everything, and I don't have to worry about anyone else. It actually makes it really great. And just the process of talking with Katrin and Robert about the character itself, and actually doing it for the first time gives you a great freedom in making choices. That there's other roles that I've done a lot of times that you sort of go through. I'm sure you guys go through this every time you do a Salome. This is kind of how you've done it so many times, and then there's a kind of process of letting that go and trying something new. But it's a unique situation to be in where it's the first time for me, and just making it up as we go. And it's been really, really a great process all around.
The last question I want to ask is, again, with Robert and Katrin here. You talked at the beginning about how so much of the drama is in the music and vice versa. How the two of you work together to form the package as a whole.
Well, it's an ongoing conversation. The score is the score. Strauss has given the directions that a composer will give. Sometimes it can be as general as a tempo indication, and sometimes it can be as specific as a metronomic marking. Quarter note's 112, a half note is 62. Well, that's a starting point. I think anyone that has ever performed in musical theater realizes that there might be greater urgency that suggests that you go a little faster. There might be a different emotional color that suggests it could go a little slower, or greater or lesser degrees of intensity. And to further the point that Ryan was just making about those interpretations and what experienced performers bring to it, I certainly know as a conductor and as a director, and I won't speak for Katrin, who's a very experienced director, the last thing you want is the last production that everybody did. If they come in, and all of us have worked in productions where someone in the cast insists on doing the last production that they did, even though everyone else is doing our production. And there is always that, I use the term organic, because when opera works in that organic way, it is the most magical art form that we have, where the power of music and the power of theater and the power of language and all of its components working together, reinforcing every dimension of it, has a special kind of language all its own. But it's an ongoing conversation, not just between the director and the conductor. There are certainly major moments where we say, okay, time needs to be taken here for this, for underscoring something in a very emphatic way, but also between the conductor and the performers. I need more time to finish this function. Sometimes it comes at a musical cost, often it does not. But, that's a process of saying, what makes it work? How long is a fermata? How long is a breath mark? How long is something? Well, all of those things have a theatrical function. And so they live in the moment, and they will change from performance to performance with the same singers. Now, the basic structure shouldn't change, because we're all pouring that mold as full as possible, but the nuances of it that give individuality to a person's interpretation, things like that, are constantly being examined and processed by the performers themselves and by the conductor. The orchestra will play well or poorly. They will play with greater degrees of inspiration, and they will play with greater finesse as the piece evolves. And that's really where we're going. And so it's a blueprint. I view it as a blueprint rather than as absolutely etched in concrete. And I think that this is just as variable as let's say the difference between some of the expectations you might have for Italian opera and German opera. Let me just share a little interesting fact. James Levine is one of the world's great Wagner conductors. And when I was at the Bayreuth Festival, when you walk into Bonfried Villa, in the hallway is a big log that has the running times of every performance that has been given since the first festival in 1876. James Levine's performances of the Wagner Ring operas, and particularly of Parsifal and Die Meistersinger, are the longest in history. They are the slowest performances of that repertoire. And it's very interesting to compare those early running times of a work like Parsifal, which is slow to begin with, because of it being a consecration drama and its meditative spirit in some respects, to what he does today, after having conducted that repertoire for 30 years, and creating a greater sense of urgency for the stage. So conductors constantly are reevaluating how you approach passages, how you approach the way to underscore elements of characterization. But I don't want to steal all of the thunder, so Katrin, you can weigh in on this as well. Or Mlada as well, because again, it's the title role, and she has such a kaleidoscope of emotional colors that she is portraying, all of which are reflected in indications in the score. We were joking the other day about one passage of about 30 measures in which there are 10 different indications of how fast the music begins to progress. You know, and how literal is that? And can you pause for a second to establish a more concrete emotional pillar here, or something like that? And so, how rigid must it be? Well, I don't think it needs to be rigid at all, because it's such a malleable process. Katrina, please.
Well, are working together?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had the great luck because Robert and his wife Lauren, they divide their time between New Orleans and New York, where I'm based, and leading up to this rehearsal period, we had the good fortune that every time that he would come to town, we would carve out an hour or two or an afternoon to actually, from the very first moment, we would have ongoing discussions on, because we hadn't worked together yet, so to get to know each other, where our theatrical sensibilities lie, sort of testing the waters, who we are as creative entities and what we are seeking from a operatic theater, especially in Salome. And you know, we clashed, we butted heads over European opera aesthetic and agreed to disagree. But we also really talked a lot and in depth about Salome, and with the score and without. So by the time we actually started rehearsals, we didn't really have much altercation, because everything, we were on the same page. We knew where we were going, you know, he every step of the way, what we were doing with the set and how the set has developed, and with the costume choices and the aesthetics. I constantly was in discussion with Robert as a collaborator, which I find the most inspiring way of working on a piece, when you can do that with a conductor as a director, because in the end it also helps the performing singers who are on stage, because in the end they have to serve two masters in a way, and I mean on the evening themselves obviously they follow the baton, but if a production is torn aesthetically between what a conductor wants and the director wants something completely different, the battleground is actually then the singers on stage. And I'm very happy that we had time to really talk a lot, so that we now have a unified vision. And in the rehearsals it really went back and forth. You know, we would start doing something musically, and then we would put it on its feet, and then we'd go back to the music and put it on its feet again. So there was constant layering of new information, which then creates this amalgam. And yes, everything is in the score, but at the same time, it's very theatrical. I mean, it is such a dramatic piece. It is a theater piece, and it requires also in-depth characterization and a lot of conversations with each character, about each character. And again, some are veterans, some are not. Obviously, I as the director, I won't bore John with the basics of Herod's character. I mean, that would be a waste of both of our time. So we have both a level of information, and then we go from there. And as a director, I often then, he said, I bring my game, I'm hired to bring my game. And I then also watch what he does, and he puts things on offer, and then I say, John, I think this is, of all the things I see here, this is a trajectory that I find more interesting than this. Let's explore more in this direction. Talking to Ryan is different because it's for him the first time, so we went more into the fundamentals of character, and again, this major watershed, whether he is human, struggling with his spirituality, or whether he's just a pillar of salt. And that was very clearly established that we would explore the humanity of him. And the same with Salome. I'm not going to talk to Mulata about the 14-year-old Salome. We were exploring in conversations also sort of what trajectory this production what I would like to tell about her emotional development, which may or may not be different from how she's done it in other ways. And Mulata has graciously and gratefully for me been very open to exploring things that I suggested. So that's also a fortune.
And if I may speak to that, it's always lovely when you have a director and a conductor who are so genial, who are able to get beyond their ego and to work so generously together. It's particularly a credit to you, Robert, I think, because you're also the general director of this company.
Well, usually if there are arguments, I can predict who will win.
I think the grace in perhaps as a Southern gentleman, I don't know, is that while that authority is there, I've yet to see you have to use it.
Well, I don't
So
feel...
that's a wonderful thing.
But, it is a collaborative process with every artist, and I don't feel that you hire great artists and then tell them how to do their job. You have to give them the latitude to express themselves and fully realize that there are always points in a collaborative process where there are going to be some disagreements and some problems to solve. And I think the real professionalism comes in the solving of those problems, and that is how everyone can fully express their point of view, from the individual artist to the stage director to the conductor to at some point, ultimately having to report the success or failure to a board of directors and to a buying public. You see, and so ultimately we are all moving toward the same goal, and that is that the operatic experience is unique and uniquely satisfying to those of you that are there in attendance, and not that it's confusing and just about a voice or just about this one component. Ideally, every cog in the machine is functioning at its fullest capacity. And that is what I think everyone on that stage and everyone that has the responsibilities for these artistic decisions strives for. But you're very kind, John.
I'm going to ask one more question of our Salome. And this role is very, very famous for having a very long dance scene in it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about the difficulty. It's a long scene to dance, and then you have to turn around and do the whole scene with the head, which is very difficult to sing as well. Just physically, how difficult is that?
Well, yes, this is like a real solo, like a big solo variations in any ballet performance for the professional ballerina. The dance itself can be long, so the timing may vary in between 6.5 or 7 minutes, until the longest timing I had was about 11. In a very slow tempo. Yes, many different versions of this. I mean, it is difficult, yes, but I was trained as the professional actress. I never studied in a conservatory or musical faculty of any sort of university. I was in performing arts. academia and study voice just privately. So maybe it helps a little bit. But also, Richard Strauss created this opera with a very smart way. After the dance, Salome actually has a big break of the rest, while it's all about Herodes and his negotiation with her. He has a huge scene with many ariosos, or if we can qualify this as ariosos and arias. He is describing so many different ways of, for Salome to be rewarded without having the head, and he fails at the end. So this is a big gap, which I use for my, to keep my breath together.
I have to say, however, I've seen her do this dance now a number of times. She is never out of breath. She hits the ground and it's absolutely still. There's no back going. Still.
Thank you, Gwen.
You're wonderful.
Well, your daughter is tough. Tough moment, tough. Actually, some director told me once that, all this story is actually about the difficult family. This is old family's issue. She's just a difficult child. And this is it, because Herodes is actually her uncle. He says that in the end of the opera, das spricht meine Bruders wife.
Yes, killed his brother.
So, yeah, he killed his own brother to marry his wife. So, yeah, it's just like a relationship.
I'd like to ask, is there any questions that any of you might have?
I have a question, and it's probably for Robert. When you decide that you're going to do an opera, you choose the opera, and you're putting together the total cast, and I know that you, of course, within the opera world, you know who's who and what's what. Who do you select first? I mean, do you pick the director and then select the rest of the cast as a duo, or do you just select them?
It varies from piece to piece. In all honesty, I seldom consult with the director about casting decisions.
Oh, okay.
It's not that some directors that I've worked with for many years might say, wow, I wonder if we could get so-and-so to do a role or something like that. But it's a process that I've developed over many years, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. And so you have to start with the Salome.
Okay.
Salome has some very special requirements. We've kind of alluded to Strauss's famous comment that you only need a 16-year-old with a voice of Isolde to sing his opera. And so you start with somebody that can actually sing it and somebody that looks the part. I will say this, and this is a little digression, but operatic audiences, music theater audiences today have a much greater expectation that the characters on the stage will look credible. They will look like the people that they represent. We are simply past the era where the generically heavy singer can sing all roles. And, in the audience's expectation. The appearance, let's say, of Herod can vary greatly. It's not as age-specific. The mother-daughter relationship between Herodias and Salome should read with some sense of truth. John the Baptist, according to the Bible, was 30 years old. That hits Ryan right where he lives. On the other hand, I've seen, as have many of you, John the Baptist sung by 55, 60-year-old dramatic baritones. All right, so how old is Narabov? Well, he's he's a young military officer, these kinds of things. So these are always considerations for me, whether I'm casting La Boheme or whether I'm casting Salome or an Aida. Do these people look like the characters that they portray? It doesn't have to be, soap opera perfection, but there should be a sense of theatrical credibility. And then you work through the performance level issues of individuals. And in the case of Ryan, doing his first one, if you read his very, very impressive international bio, you see lots of roles that would suggest this is going to be very successful. When you are singing Escamillo in major houses and roles like that, and you say, this is generally the look and the voice type that you're wanting, and so forth. So that's when it's easy to take a chance on the person who's doing their first one, and they have the background and the experience. But it's kind of a fun part of the job. And as I say, sometimes you have a very specific theatrical need, and at that point I will consult with the director and say, is there, here's some people that I'm familiar with. Is there someone that you think would be just absolutely perfect for this because they need comedic talent or they need certain kind of flexibility on the stage with movement or things like that? Because after all, we're pursuing the same goal. And that is the sense that you sit there and there's not anything in that production that you think, that puzzle piece just doesn't quite fit into place. And so that's kind of the casting process.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think you've had some good selections since you've been directing.
Thank you. I take care in doing it. I don't try generic casting. And that is to send me a quartet of singers. yeah, send me a Salome cast and the head. It has to look like one of them.
Maestro, again, if you could sing that theme, that motif for us again, and you say that's when Salome...
The first time we hear it, Strauss is very, well, I love two moments. I love two moments about that particular leitmotif. When Johann goes back into the cistern, and he has just done what I call his scorched earth theology. He says, "Du bist verflucht," you are accursed. And he turns and he goes back to his cistern. And she doesn't know what to do with herself. I mean, she's been so totally rejected. And what you'll see is some wonderful staging. I commend the originality of that, Katrin. That I mean, it's like a petulant child, that doesn't know what to do with the emotional complexities of her own rejection. And then in the trumpets, and it's marked pianissimo, very, very soft. You hear bom, 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 which we find out later when Herod has said, "Oh, this is wonderful, wunderbar, this is fabulous dancing, tell me what you want, anything you want." I mean, you would have expected that fist in the gut to be very strong, brassy, big dramatic statement, and it's so understated, it's breathtaking, because he even puts in the stage instructions while laughing.
No, smiling.
Oh, smiling. Smiling, yeah. She says, very lightly, "I want the head of John the Baptist." And boy, the explosion in that brass section that follows it is what you had thought was going to be the delivery. So it's the way he uses these little musical signatures, quite wonderful. But it is our guidebook through the opera when you come to some of these multi-layered moments. It also interests me that Strauss wrote the last scene first. He took the famous French play of Oscar Wilde, which had been translated into German and had started enjoying some success in the German theaters. It was banned in England and not very successful in Paris. And when it was translated into German and beginning to be performed, and he saw it, then I think he realized where the greatest problem was going to be, and that is, how do you do this 18-minute closing scene with the head? And that's what he chose to write first. And what is fun for me is that's the way Wagner wrote his entire Ring cycle. You know, he wrote a poem called Siegfried, The Death of Siegfried, and then he changed it and wrote Young Siegfried, and then he worked backwards and wrote Die Walküre, and then he wrote Das Rheingold, and then he wrote the music moving forward. And Strauss used a similar technique, and so consequently all the leitmotifs that he used to fabricate, if you will, that magnificent 18-minute closing scene became the raw material for the operas proper. You know? So it's quite a wonderful creation, but become familiar with those. Listen to the recording. You know, it is enormously complex music, but it has about it a great singerly quality. It has the modulation to C-sharp major at the end that is just ethereal in its ecstasy. And regardless of the sordidness of the way that we have arrived there through her ecstasy with the head, it's quite a musical moment. And so the more familiar you are with that music, the more you're certain to sing.
I want to thank all of you for coming today. The ladies I know are ready for you to come over to the other side of the room. If you have other questions, please feel free to talk to the artists, but I, on behalf of everyone, thank you all very much for taking the Go to the other side.